right. Hey everyone, Brendan Snyder here. Thanks so much for joining me. I'm sitting here with John Rutan from Audio Connection. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, welcome anytime, welcome anytime.
So, as most of you guys know, I recently bought a new component stereo system here from John. You guys saw that video, and John was nice enough to invite me back for a sort of follow-up video on it, but also you're gonna give me some good tips, just all around great stuff like that.
Yeah, first of all, Greg was nice to help Brendan get on a start with a nice frugal system.
He was fantastic. I just gotta say, shout out to Greg because he was so patient, took his time with me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, he could come up with some great little combinations, and I've always admired his ear for putting things together. So my observations on the system, which I looked at pictures of the room, is I think we all said, oh, we need to get off the floor.
Right, which I did.
Yeah, so speakers are off the floor now, and to follow up, he got another level of performance by getting the yield of better articulation. When doing this, for anybody with a speaker stand, there's a fine little line what we can do between finding the right spot in a room and then one that just works. Many of us don't know how to find the right spot in the room. We try and try and try until it works.
Well, talk a little bit about the triangle that Greg was telling me about, because when I went home and set up at first, I really wasn't hearing it. It didn't sound the way it did in the room. And I'm thinking, oh no, maybe I don't like these. Maybe I have to take these back, right? But I said, wait a minute, let me try this thing. And when I found it, sounded so much better.
So we call it a support system or a wall gain. You can listen to your own voice in your own room, and if I walk up against the wall and I'm closer to a wall, and I use my voice to say heavy, and I walk out from the wall, heavy, 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 less heavy, heavy. I still got support here.
Absolutely.
You can hear the voice change as you pop out from the wall. So what you want is for the speaker to have the right amount of support from the wall, but maintaining a neutral tonal balance. So a lot of these little guys have a little hit up at 90 hertz, and that's their bass foundation. They still can go to 70 and some notes at 60. But when you hear the right bass working with the room, say with a piano note, a piano note has a nice wide bandwidth feel to it. So the piano sounds right. So some audio guys like to bring the speakers 1/3 out into the room. Good for panels, figure eights. But for a nice little fine or a point source ProAC, a little B&W, ATCs that are shielded.
Well, not all of us have big rooms too that we can take 1/3 of it up by pulling something out.
Right, so you gotta find a spot that works for you. The other thing to follow out is you could do that trick with your voice and slowly walk out. Some people do it in a corner. And then you walk up from the corner a little bit out, and you go up about 10, 11, and listen to that voice as you walk out of the corner. At about 12, 13, 14 inches, your voice stops being heavy. And when that happens, then you could go into the room maybe a few inches or however. You hear that point of natural tonal balance, and that's a good spot for the speaker. So if your voice works, so's the speaker. Then once you get the speaker on the stand and you have toe-in vectors, and what we like to do is start out at the same toe-in. I take a piece of bakery string, go around one side of the speaker, go around the other, and let's say we start out with 7/8 of a toe-in. You measure the string right in front of the speaker with a piece of tape if you don't have a friend. And you measure 1 inch of toe-in or 1/2 inch, whatever works for you in your listening position. But getting the triangle and then measuring, say, from this speaker to that speaker, let's say they're 72 inches away. You want to set 72 inches and then 20% beyond that.
He was telling me 2 feet beyond. Is it always 2 feet, or is it a 20%?
20% will work anywhere.
He might have done that based on when I gave him an example and said, 6 feet, and then
Well, he might have
or
not.
5 feet, or I said some. I gave him a specific. He may have just tacked on the 2.
He might
So
have
it's-
not wanted to give you the secret formula.
Maybe, but it's 20%.
Right,
So-
we're getting it today now.
Thanks.
So when anybody has their speakers 10 feet wide,
Yeah.
sit with your ears 12 feet out
Okay.
and measure the speakers.
Right.
First of all, 10 feet wide,
Okay.
and you go 10 feet out, and then
Right.
20% would be about 12 feet. So now you're in that triangle, and I find that's where most recording engineers seem to work with most speakers
Okay.
in the way they make the recording. It seems to sound right. Many a guy in their home, they're sitting at 16 feet back, and their speakers are 6 feet wide, and
I've got a friend that's sitting in this long room where very narrow the speakers are together,
right.
and the room is really long, and he sits all the way in the back of the room.
Okay.
And I have to say, when I'm in there, that was one of the reasons that, or experiences with a system that I didn't think sounded good. And I was like, I'm not paying all this money for that. And I had that in a couple experiences, and now I'm wondering if they weren't set up properly.
Yeah, what you do is maintain ratio of the triangle plus 20%. Then the warmth of that gain coming out from the wall coming out. You might like a little extra slugger in the bass, so you go closer to the wall.
Right.
But if there's some bass overhang with ported speakers, that can prevail. So if you have a shield speaker, you could go real close to a wall and get surprisingly decent articulate bass. This day of ports, it allows a smaller amp to be used with a ported speaker, and it's more affordable. And
What's the type that I purchased? The Fine. What would you call
it's
that?
a downward
How far
firing,
should that be?
A downward firing ports. And
Is that the cone that I saw on the bottom?
Yeah,
I noticed that when I raised it up off the floor and I could actually see it, I was like, wait, what the heck is that thing?
Yeah, that'll vary in all rooms. So there's no hidden one formula to say, oh, 2 feet off from the wall.
Okay.
What you want to do is do that little trick. You walk out from the wall, maintain that triangle plus 20%, and then if your speaker stands are the right height, your ear, and a coaxial design like that, you could be off axis and it kind of works. So a little Vandersteen VLR or a Fine with a coax design can be friendly off axis.
Okay.
So the main thing is to get your total balance satisfying and get your stereo imaging to work as well. So the wall gain is important. Ported speakers seem to want to pull out even further because they have a bigger bass action going on. In order to get them from being excessively boomy, you want to pull them out even further.
Right. Yeah, I'm not a big fan of heavy bass.
Right.
And that was something I did notice when I had it down on the floor and it was more tight up against the console that I had.
Right.
When I lifted that up and I got that off and I had more space around it,
Right.
they suddenly sounded really good.
Right. Well, change from one thing to the next is either a welcome or not so welcome.
Right.
But we all have different taste. And I like a little bit of a solid bass constitution, and the Fine speakers were pretty satisfying when you get them after the wall a little bit, and the downward firing bass seemed to be less distractive than a front port or a rear port. I prefer rear ports because you're not hearing port noise.
Okay.
Overall, I like the quality of a shield speaker even better because while you need more power to drive that and that functionality of the speaker, it ends up sounding more linear as the bass goes down on acoustic bass. But let's face it, a ported speaker, value-wise, a little pair of some NAD gear, and you're flying, man. You know, most of the guys hear that and it's strategically positioned, and we're having a lot of fun.
Exactly, and I was able to get off the ground with that, with some Fine speakers, my NAD equipment, which was new to me. I didn't even know what that stood for at the time. I Googled it once I got home, and it's new acoustic design?
Right, I just call it NAD now.
Right. I think that's all anyone calls it, but...
But getting into the speaker stand, I've had guys just to get a can of paint and just paint up some 16-inch cinder blocks, which are better than the cheap pair of wood stands that you paid, $74 for.
Right, because you want some mass to it.
You want it not to move.
Yeah.
Because a piano or something with some bass force, the more you can get the solidity of that speaker, it projects music out better.
Sure.
So as we discussed, positioning is critical for a lot of speakers. If you're in a carefree zone and it's a lifestyle system, you got to position things where they are, but you can always get better bass a foot or two out from the wall, out of the corner, because your corner loads up the bass with the most reinforcement. It's also where the most confusion in the bass can be.
Is that just it bouncing off the wall and stuff?
It's the floor of the corner reinforcement.
Okay.
It can give you as much as a 9 to 12 decibel lift at the lower frequencies.
Well, I did notice that too, where I was having a very hard time if I turned my volume up a hair, it seemed like it was so much louder. When I lifted them up and I got them away from the wall, I actually had more play.
Right, because you're saturating the listening room. A lot of us with small rooms, we don't want to overload the room. And in a square room, you can run asymmetrical positioning where you have, say, one speaker on that side of the corner, one speaker on that side of the corner, put your gear in the corner, and that's called an asymmetrical. You see a lot of guys at hotel rooms doing that in these shows because they have a better control of boundary reflections that confuse our ears of hearing the fundamental or the unwanted confusing reflections. So it's the same thing at any price. You want to try to make the setup work for you.
Yeah, and so I did try that asymmetrical setup that you suggested because I've got like an L-shaped room. And I did like the sound there, except it threw off everything else in the room, meaning just functionality.
Right.
So I ended up bringing it back to where it was, but pulling it more out of the corner.
Right.
And further off the wall.
Sure.
Until I found a sound that was very close to what it had been when it was on the asymmetrical of the room itself. It was just that it brought the furniture out so far, and I thought, man, I don't know where I'm moving everything else to achieve this. So I'm glad I tested it and tried it because it showed me what the sound could be for the room.
Yeah, because bass anomalies can load up in the corner and you get out of the corner and then your bass is more linear.
Right.
It's not always a speaker's fault because they project those in a lab that's as cohesive as they can make them. It's pretty hard to get a bad speaker nowadays with computer modeling.
Right.
And now they do these tricks like downward firing ports gives efficiency, but you're hearing a loudspeaker without the port distortions or colorations of yesteryear.
So, in continuing on the idea where I was, and I mentioned this to you when we were on the phone, not getting a lot. I don't listen to it very loud. So I mean, if I was listening to it louder, then the volume knob on it would be fine. But I don't have a lot of play in it. And you mentioned something called an attenuator.
There's things that a lot of DACs put out a more voltage than they're supposed to. And I think the standard CD player or DAC should be about 2 volts, but nowadays they could go 3 or 4. So that puts a lot of gain in the source. The CD player can be too much gain. And then you get up on the volume control just a little bit and you're overloaded. There's just too much gain. So I believe attenuator, 12 or a 20 dB attenuator can knock that down. And
is this a thing that plugs into the back, or is this a separate little box
or something?
It
can plug in at the back of the amp.
Okay.
It's a source that connects off of any source that's overloading, and you drop the decibels down as much as desired.
Okay, because I noticed when I was using the Node, the streamer, I had a lot more play. I turned that up where it starts at a much lower volume. So I guess is that normal? and 2, I thought that the DAC that's in it, I want you if you can explain that as well. But why is that? Why does it come in so much quieter than, say, the CD?
Well, variable voltage outputs, if you look at a node, is probably conforming to the 2 volt output. I'm not sure exactly what it is.
Okay.
But most output devices in a standard CD player will be about 2 volts. That's what the original thought was to make a CD.
Okay.
The trouble is in many a system that I've seen out there over 30 years is that you get a high gain DAC, say 7 volts, and then you get a gain in a preamp with 30 dB, and then you get a high sensitivity amplifier, and you put that all together, and it's mayhem because you're getting up to 8 o'clock, 8:30, and it's blasted. So I always like to match up systems so that they're optimized at a 10 or 11 or 12 o'clock listening position. Many years ago, you go to a department store and there was a company called SAE. And during the Japanese receiver era, you'd see Kenwood, Hitachi, Marantz. They turn the volume up to about 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, it would be blasting. So the guy would say in his brain, wow, that's powerful. I would never listen. That's too much power. It has nothing to do with power. It has to do with the gain in the amplifier. So SAE came out with this little R3C receiver. It was only 30 watts. And you'd have to turn the volume up to 10, 11, 12. And the people would say, that's not too powerful. But man, did it sound better. So,
I mean, to me, at the end of the day, it's all in how it sounds anyways. I don't really care how much the knob goes, but it's got to sound good.
But the Asian receivers couldn't help resist the perception of power.
Well, most people don't know the ins and outs of all this. I mean, that's one of the reasons that I'm here, and I'm so grateful you asked me to come down, because I don't know all of this. And so I would be one of those ones that would get taken by that.
Right. Well, the ideal volume control is if I dictated to you that you can only listen to 1 or 2 volumes, we would get rid of the pot and just have a stepped resistor as the gain. And that's what a lot of exotic high-end preamps try to do, is bypass the potentiometer. Air acoustics is one of them, and the now they call it a variable gain volume control. And at 9 o'clock it sounds great, 10 o'clock great. Wherever you go at low volumes, it's sounding better than most preamps because you're getting rid of that volume control. So the more you can work with the volume control in an ideally balanced system of the node, say 2 volts out, and the NAD's preamp is happy up at 11 o'clock, I think it's just going to sound more linear and coherent to your ears.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, it all comes back to how your ears hear something. We all hear it a little differently. And that's kind of the thing I have found out, as I mentioned before, experiencing some different setups from friends and people that had them. For them, maybe it sounded right. So, I mean, I assume it must have, because that's how they were doing it, but it didn't for me. And I was really sort of starting to realize how different we all hear things.
Well, I think you're just more perceptive than the average guy, because I look at this and people are either analytical in their minds to observe what they like or find out how you feel. What do we have nerves for? How do they make us feel? If you're hurt, your nerves hurt, well, how do you want to get better? So you figure nerves and our senses is all we have. The more senses we have to embrace the music, the better we are. Now, there's some customers, they're in love with the chase. That's all they do is analyze. And it turns into the music's a backseat compared to
what they got, and the technical aspect of it.
They're curious about the next machine, because let's face it, there is a little bit of a dopamine enhancement to the brain, and you love this stuff because
new product, it's like the new car. I mean, everybody likes to get the new car,
which is why this is a tough subject to get into, because some guys just want to hear the music, and I appreciate those guys. But when they get into when you can make the Rolling Stones sound right?
Exactly.
It takes a little working in it. I always wondered, wow, I thought the Rolling Stones, what a fun band that is. But I've noticed some of their recordings, say compared to the Moody Blues, they're both doing Decca. What gives? So is there compression? Is it the recording? But a lot
is
of
it the mixing of it?
Is it the mixing? Well, I think what they're trying to do is create even like Motown sound. When you listen to some of the Motown, it's almost can be a little confusing. But when you get the overall picture and it's right, you can appreciate how good the Rolling Stones are, how great Motown is. And with the way they mix things, I think it's essential that you get your bass line right. For me, I need to have the bass line right.
I agree, because otherwise it's distracting to me.
Well, it's a lack of emotional perception. You get emotion in the music, and you could cry all by yourself. But the most important thing we're Look at Hans Zimmer. The way he makes music is amazing, and he's got the drama, and it builds up, and it does this crescendo, and you get the goosebumps just thinking about it.
I know, right? Just talking about it.
Just talking about it.
That's a real music fan there, right? You can talk about it and get the goosebumps.
But a guy like Richard Vanderstein, I've conversed with him. He's an interesting character, been in the industry for 40 plus years. And he has to listen distinctively to vinyl to get excited. And I can appreciate that. And I tell my guys, we're looking for CDs and convenience and happiness with streaming. The vinyl thing is real. If the better the speaker, the more the vinyl's going to show you who the King Cobra is.
Right.
So I'm glad to see a lot of these youngsters getting more into basic turntables like Regas and Projects and MMFs, and they're having fun, and we support all that.
I just love that physical media is coming back as opposed to it only being the digital. And I did go out again. I mean, I bought the Note, so I will do the streaming as well. But I don't know, I still want to hold the physical album in my hand. I bought the brand new Rolling Stone on CD.
The cool thing about streaming is it allows you to discover who you might have forgotten about.
Absolutely, and it lets me try different bands that I wouldn't normally try. So I'm thinking, oh, hey, I'm not really into that band, or I've seen that name around so many different times. I can go stream it. And when somebody drops a brand new single, well, here's one. The Beatles have a brand new song dropping next Thursday.
Right.
Okay, so this is John Lennon's song from 1970 that Yoko Ono gave to the three remaining Beatles in 1994 for the Anthology project. It wasn't finished. Here we are, 2023, and Ringo and Paul have finished it off.
Sure.
It's only going to be available to stream. I mean, you can go buy it on a 45 or something, but it's not like it's on an album. It's not coming out on a compilation. So I want a streamer for that.
Yeah.
But I want it to sound good. And what I've noticed is, because I do have a streaming service and I use that for commuting, so new albums drop on Friday. I don't have my physical copies yet because I'm commuting to the office. Put on my headphones and I hear an album and I'm like, it's good, but I don't know, I don't really like it. Get home later and I pop on the CD and I'm like, this is awesome. Why didn't I like it?
Yeah. CDs can have a little bit more vividness, I think, in dumbing down the streaming sometimes, even some of the better ones. They can get exciting as you move up the ladder with pricier streamers. But between the vinyl and some of even the CD playback, I know a lot of guys that think that a transport is still the better way to go than streaming.
Right. No, and I agree completely on that. I do think that the streamer that I picked up sounded way better than when I was just running it through my DIN before.
Yeah.
And so there's is it a DAC that's on the inside?
Yeah, there's a DAC inside.
And what does that mean?
You also have the liberty to go out with a USB out on that unit.
Okay.
And in this day and age, there's many guys always upgrading. You could kind of find yourself a good clean DAC and actually improve beyond what the ability of the Note is. So let's say, for example, you find a used Air QB9 laying around for $600, $800. They were a top dog back in 2014, 15, 16. That's 10 years ago, whatever.
Yeah.
You plug that in and some systems will bubble up like, wow, it's all discrete output devices compared to good op amps that are in most of your CD players under $1,000. So when you get to that next level, whether it's a Bryston or a discrete architecture or even a Heed, if you look at a Heed headphone amp, they're using all discrete elements in there, which at 500 on a phono stage is unheard of. But when you graduate into the better DACs, you can appreciate to a higher level. But then again, like you said, these things got to match together. I think what you have matches beautifully.
Yeah, it certainly seems to. And I, again, want to thank Greg for doing that, for putting that together for me.
Yeah, he's got a good set of ears. But what we always can do, when you feel comfortable out there doing this, you don't have to stay away. You could sample things here and see what that next little step ladder would be if you want to go up, or add a little well subwoofer in a bigger room if you move into a different environment. Little Rel T0 is about $4.99 or so. Small little woofer, and you could place it near a wall boundary, and then all of a sudden the foundation has got more low-end support. But not all rooms need that. I've been in small rooms, and a little pair of two-ways is all they need.
Yeah, and so I mean, I do hope that now that I've sort of opened this door here, and I'm trying this, that I will be coming back and test some things. You'll give me a call up, say, hey, I got something new, and you might be interested in, when I get to check that out.
Well, Greg, who put your system together, has a very similar system to what you have.
Okay.
In the size comparison. So your size of a nice small speaker on a firm pair of stands is, let's face it, a very nice size for many people, and especially in the tri-state area. Because many people, let's face it, real estate and small rooms is all we can deal with.
Right.
So he went with a little pair of Vandersteen VLRs, which are a similar concept, a sealed cabinet, and he's working with maybe a little more power of Bellis monoblocks, and he's running a pair of the Rel T0s. And that system for its size is special. And just like if you took on a Rel or two in a room, a medium-sized room, the foundation's there, but having two woofers, to me, is always better than having one woofer turned up loud, because you even out the in-room response, and then your mid-range doesn't suffer. So a lot of people are scared of subwoofers because they had a 12-inch woofer and it blew the mid-range out.
And that's what I was going to ask, because one of the biggest comments that I was getting from the first video that I posted was about getting a subwoofer. So where do you stand in terms of that?
It's a very taboo subject, but most purebred audiophiles will say, I don't want a subwoofer. What you have to realize about an in-room response is how it transitions or blends. When you're blending a subwoofer doesn't blend. You need 2 or 4, in my opinion, to get it right. Now, why would the average guy says, why do you need 4? Well, you turn them all just a little bit on, and the base in-room distribution happens to a far higher level, and then your mid-range is more spatial, and it just connects you with the foundation. Then you're able to have a vividness in the mid-range. But the better the speaker, the better the mid-range saddle is. And you don't want to have some big clunking, air-moving, trouser-flapping woofer that's good to impress the dinosaur reproduction rather than middle C in a piano with Ray Brown in there. So bass is a very touchy thing. You don't want to ever hear bass boom. As soon as that happens, your brain it's an artifact, it's not supposed to be there. Your brain goes, oh, that's booming. So I'm sensitive to a room anomaly, very sensitive to something that's not right, and that's one of the reasons I told you about asymmetrical.
Yeah, you mentioned the slapback. Is that what you called it?
Well, there's the wall gives us a foundation, or it's called a response, or a power response, in how a piano or a tuba or a trombone has a foundation. When those instruments are near a wall with a good linear speaker that's not hepped up in the bass, you're going to hear more of natural presentation in your system. So positioning is very important, but a lot of loudspeakers do have a big lift in the bass to make them sell, and the more refined speakers might not get noticed as much, but 3 months later, I think you're still gonna have a smile on your face when you do a good loudspeaker setup.
So one last thing here as I start to wrap this up, amps, I always hear the thing about tube amps.
Right.
So where does that stand in comparison to what I've purchased? I guess how do you feel about tube amps, but also just what is its relation?
Okay, there's a fine line between having a tube amp that sounds like a tube and one that's big and burly and real powerful. Everything in life has a mix. Thomas Edison said, keep it as simple as possible, but not too simple. So a pair of speakers like yours, I took a 100-watt Rode Chronos with the KT88s in there, or 120s. And then we put KT77s in there. And the magic happened with your speakers. It was just glorious. It's a fundamental that mid-range haunting 3D thing that happens with tubes and just the right speaker. So it's having the right elements. I find British speakers like the L34s better than the 6550s.
So it's always going to come down to the components, the individual things that you have and how it's put together.
Right.
Is you know, it's not just having the tube amp or just having the speakers or, you know.
Yeah, I find that, you know, some tube amps, when they're on the small side, they don't really work so well with sealed speakers. But, you know, ported speakers seem to keep the bass tighter in there because they're leaner. They're not going down heavy at 60 hertz like a big solid state amp. So ported speakers can be nursed into a nice tube experience, but tubes aren't for everybody. There's over idiosyncrasies that happen with biasing adjustments. They run hotter. They're not for everybody. You have to have a little flexible personality or temperament to be able to deal with it. But sometimes a curiosity. My first exposure to a tube was when my mother bought me a guitar amplifier. I said, wow, this is a pleasurable sound. My father took me to the baseball game in a 1962 Ford Galaxy, and Mr. Tambourine and the Birds came on, and I noticed the guitar was a Rickenbacker. It just had this twang to it, and I always remembered that. And tubes can be very melodic, but as things progress, there's loudspeakers out there that have such a low distortion now, and materials that are very faithful to not having overring or overrun. And there's a simple solid state amp for that speaker. A little Rega Brio or a NAD, sometimes they just sound so pure and simple because there's less congestion in that simple amp. So like we said, keep it as simple as possible, but not too simple.
There you go. I think that's kind of the lesson here. Keep it as simple as possible, but not too simple. And, you know, make sure that all of the components and things work well together.
Yeah.
And then location.
Yeah, finding your happiness it doesn't have to be an end-all search. When you go fishing, you don't have to turn over every rock in the forest to find a worm. You need a few worms.
Just a few worms, yeah.
You don't have to have 40 of them, but when you do come upon the worms that we use, I think you'll catch a fish. And have fun. It's more about having fun and explain what's on your mind and what you're looking for.
Certainly. Well, I've certainly had fun doing this, and I really appreciate you taking the time out to talk to me, to talk to everyone watching here about this. So, John, thank you so much.
Again, thanks for having me on the show there, and I hope you guys are all having a great day.
Yeah, and I'm going to leave a link in the description down below for all your information. So if you're in the Verona, New Jersey area and you want to hit up Audio Connection, say hi to John or Greg, my buddy who hooked me up, please do.
Feel free to call anytime, any questions, we're here for you.
Fantastic. All right, thanks everyone. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.